Hi friends, let's talk 911 interviews. So you've made it past the critical test. I spend all my time talking to people about the critical test. If you've got an interview, you've made it past that. Excellent. So let me tell you what the interviews are often like. Again, I can't speak to every agency in North America, but the general standard is that there's going to be a mix of lengthy but few questions. So they'll generally give you like 5 to 10 long questions that they expect answers to be 7 to 10 minutes a piece. These questions are going to be behavioral, situational, or questions about you. I call them personality questions. So let's consider a couple of these. So behavioral interview questions are those questions where they ask you to name a time in your past where you exemplified a certain type of behavior or where you dealt with a certain type of situation. So it's based on your previous behavior, which is why it's called behavioral. And so you're going to show them through your behavior in the past how you addressed a situation. And the best way to do that is the STAR method. So the STAR method is the gold standard in approaches to answering behavioral interview questions. And let's take a look at what the STAR method is. So STAR is an acronym, and the S stands for situation. So you're going to need to first describe the scenario that you're going to use to answer the behavioral question in enough detail to give a full picture of the event. And you're going to want to include the people involved and any necessary background knowledge that's required to sort of put that situation in context. The T stands for task. So you're going to explain your role in this task or in this larger situation. And more so, what is your responsibility? What landed on your shoulders during this event? The A stands for action. You're going to want to describe the actions you took to resolve the situation. And I always recommend trying to explain your logic and reasoning and those steps that you used in your approach to resolving the situation. And the R is for results. So then you're going to share the outcome of the incident. This is often overlooked by a lot of interview candidates. People just sort of assume that everyone knows that everything went well at the end of the story. After they explain the situation and their actions, a lot of people miss this part where you tell them what the outcome was of the incident. And you're going to want to include how that outcome affected yourself as well as anybody else involved. And finally, I add an extra R onto this one. You won't find this in most of the behavioral interview strategy guides, but I always say it's a star with the extra R for reflection. I think that these behavioral interview questions are a really great time to sort of showcase your thought process and the fact that you're capable of reflecting and improving yourself. So you want to demonstrate your ability to reflect on the event and how you use that reflection to help make future decisions. So things like sharing how your thoughts and feelings were about the event, what you learned from that event, what you could learn to teach others. How did the event affect you and others and your job performance in the future as well? And even as a larger picture, in some cases, these events that you're going to use for your behavioral interview situation questions are going to be things that may have impacted the entire organization or even just the work team. So maybe as a result of your situation that you used, a process changed at work or a policy. So you want to make sure that you include the fact that you reflected on it afterwards and you did walk away with it, with a better knowledge of something or a lesson learned or a way to change things to improve them so that there isn't a situation like this in the future. And I think that's a really important part to these behavioral interview questions. Okay, so question type number 2 is situational. Situational questions are those ones where they're going to ask you about what would you do in a given situation. So behaviorals were what have you done in the past to prove your future behavior, and the situational ones are, in theory, how would you problem solve this future scenario that is hypothetical? So situational questions are going to be things like, what would you do if you were directed to do something you didn't agree with by a supervisor? Or what would you do if you had to follow a policy that you thought was incorrect? Okay, so
this is how we're going to look at addressing these types of questions.
And let's take a look at a few more examples of situational questions often asked during 911 interviews. So, number one, what would you do if one of your colleagues reported for duty under the influence of alcohol? Number two, you see a coworker make a critical error when handling a 911 call. How do you deal with it? Number three, a 911 call comes in from a person who requires medical help but is not sure where they are. What actions do you take to ensure help makes it to them? And finally, number four, you are Facebook friends with a coworker and notice they are making social media posts about some of the emergency calls they have processed. How do you handle this? And in all these scenarios, they're looking to ensure that you have a logical process, that you understand chains of command and how to report incidents, that you understand the importance of following existing policies and guidelines, as well as the overarching sort of policies and general statements from your workplace.
And finally, type number 3 is personality questions. These are those questions where they say, tell us about yourself, or why would you be a good fit for this organization? These are the kind of questions they're just throwing out at you to sort of get a feel for the candidate. What used to happen was the interviews, years and decades ago, interviews were basically all of these personality questions. And then they realized that they needed more stern assessment tools and criteria to try to figure out which candidates were best for the job. And so they started using mostly behavioral with a combination of situational questions. And they took out all of the personality questions. The problem with that was that they were finding that they were ending up with pools of candidates and they didn't really get a good feel for them. And because they had limited themselves with these behavioral and situational questions, it was really hard to get an idea about what the person was like, if they had a sense of humor, what sort of things they enjoyed outside of the workplace, what sort of personality traits did they value. So they've started adding 1 or 2 of these personality questions back into most interviews. Again, I can't speak to all of North America, but they do tend to use at least one, but sometimes 2 of these personality type questions. Now, the other questions, I gave you ideas about how to structure a response, and they are, very logical. The personality questions are your time to shine. This is your chance to give an elevator pitch. So you get 6 minutes to sell yourself to these people. 6 minutes to sell yourself. So what I would like you to do is before you go to your interview, you need to plan out the, image and brand of you that you want them to know. And again, not lying, but just reflect on all the great things about yourself so that you're sure that you're able to convey those when you get in there. And again, it doesn't hurt to kind of throw in examples. It doesn't have to be structured like behavioral questions. You don't have to use the STAR method, but it doesn't hurt to give examples about, why you would be a good fit for a job. Or if they ask you, name some of your strengths and weaknesses. Name off some of those things and give some examples of how you've dealt with them, or how you're coping with weaknesses to, improve yourself, things like that. So again, those 3 question types are behavioral, situational, and personality questions. And something else to note is sort of the venue of your interview. So most, again, not all, but most 911 communicator interviews are done by a panel. The panel would consist of anywhere from 3 up to possibly like 9 or 10 people, depending on the agency. And those people will be generally a few people from management. Typically, there's at least 1 supervisor from communications there, as well as 1 representative from HR. So you're going to have a mix. Sometimes there's trainers or training personnel there as well. You're going to have a mix of these folks who generally have experience either taking calls or managing people who take calls, and they're going to be assessing you. You may, depending on your agency, I've heard of a few that have an additional officer that will sit in the back of the room and assess your physical behaviors. So these are officers who are trained in looking at physical cues, body language, to assess, truthfulness, to assess personality types based on this, and they'll sit in the back of the room to assess your body language while you're answering questions. And again, if you're yourself, if you're honest and confident, you will be just fine. Another reason they put these officers in the back is sometimes just to add a little bit of stress, to, again, throw an extra curveball at you to measure your resilience, because you do have to be so resilient to be a 911 dispatcher. And so they need to really know, can you handle it? Will you be able to survive the training and the call taking itself, to be honest? So they will try to create stressful environments to ensure that they are hiring people that are capable and resilient of handling stress. Good luck on your interview. Study, practice, and walk in there with all the confidence in the world. And I hope that you get your 911 job. Thanks for joining us. Please subscribe, and I'll see you next time.